So it's New Year's Eve. A nice gathering of people tonight. Our retreat crew and some other visitors. It's quite lovely to think that there are people who want to come join us here tonight and seek Abhayagiri, coming here to chant, meditate, listen to Dhamma as a refuge from what might also be going on tonight. Sort of that expectation of reverie, but also people acting in ways that sometimes are unskillful, and not always in the best interest of themselves or others. It's an interesting time for us in the monastery. It happens every year that on New Year's Eve, we're just sort of poised to essentially close the monastery to our usual daily change what our focus is from practicing with a lot of activity and work, and also engaging in our formal practice, studying Buddhist teachings. And we enter into a slightly different phase where the monastics who've spent, for many of us, nine months in the monastery, and we begin to focus a little bit more on the formal side of our practice, our sitting and walking meditation, dedicating ourselves to a little bit different focus on our kammatthana objects, our sense of where our mind is focusing on. So in the monastery, it's kind of this New Year's day, it can feature in the mind quite a bit as just this very strong change in our focus, and what comes up is often a sense, okay, this is like a 3-month period. It's a very long period. For formal practice, it's sometimes more than some people will have in their entire life. And so we're quite fortunate each year to have this time to give ourselves to this practice. And extremely fortunate, there are 9, there's a support team here of 9 men who have decided to come here and offer their support, service during the retreat, and also partake in the retreat with us. I was just speaking with one of our lay supporters on the phone who's contemplating monasticism, and this person had said just how precious of a place they thought Abhayagiri was. And encouraged me to reflect on that. So, yeah, it's not a common situation. A place that has so many good qualities, good people, good teachers. So I guess if there's anything to celebrate with reverie, we can remind ourselves of the preciousness of not only that there is a monastery like Abhayagiri in the world, but there's many monasteries where there's this dedication towards truth and understanding. So this time of year is, and particularly on this day, is a day where people sometimes will focus on trying to change their life, come up with aspirations, determinations, since, okay, this is a new beginning. It's a new year. And I think it's quite important for us, or why it's quite important for us, is that we don't have so many years. We don't have so many times that the earth is revolving around the sun. And so this revolution just happens, for some of us, 70, 80 years. For others, it can be a lot shorter and rare. For others, it can be longer. So we kind of see this as a significant time for reassessing, like, well, am I going in the right direction? Is this the right movement for me? Is there something I should improve upon? And so there's this tradition. So I would argue in this way that it's more of like our attitude around the changes we wish. It's a very similar. It can have a very similar sense for us that we're entering into a period where our focus on our practice is different. And so we think, okay, what can I do to really encourage myself? What are the things that I can put forth? What are the efforts I can make that will allow me to kind of aim in the direction that I think is better for myself? And it's helpful to think about resolutions. People don't often think about, I'm going to resolve to get myself, a lot more drunk this year, or I'm going to resolve to harm as many more people as I possibly can. Just double my efforts on just really upsetting people, and I'm going to say the most god-awful things as much as I possibly can, so that there's just this incredible sense of embarrassment all the time. So we don't kind of aim in these negative directions. But even as extreme as those sound, sometimes we make things that are the opposite. Like somebody who enjoys drinking a lot, that's something that they do a lot, have a fair amount of alcohol. And they say, I'm just going to stop. I'm not going to have alcohol anymore. Well, I think that can work for a very small percentage of people. So we have to really be aware of what it is that we're deciding, and how much we're taking on. And we're obviously wanting to move in the wholesome direction. So that's something that we can pat ourselves on the back for having that aspiration. Because that comes from a sense of knowing that I am not headed in the direction I want to head. As Ajahn Cunda mentioned last night, we have to be very careful about how we're doing this, because our efforts can be overzealous at times. Or, as I mentioned, with New Year's resolutions, they can be rather slack. And so the Buddha really he kept teaching this middle way, saying, it's not like you're trying to torture yourself or go towards sense indulgence, but also you have to be careful about this, the sense of how hard you're pushing yourself, or if you're not doing enough of that. I remember when the first winter retreat I was here, I served a winter retreat in 2006. And I'd already been around the monastery for a few months. I was crowned the kitchen manager, which you find eventually is not a crowning, it's sort of commiseration. But then, when one has the right attitude, then it becomes an incredible field of learning. And I would say that probably it really helped me in my monastic training, having taken on that position, and also then working with the fact that it's a position of generosity and kindness. But at the time of that retreat, it was interesting. It was I had already done some longer retreats, and before I had come to Abhayagiri, and which might have sounded like that was good because I had experience, but then, of course, that meant I thought I knew what I was doing. And I remember that retreat, Ajahn Cunda was reminiscing about it. And it was I think at that time, Ajahn Cunda maybe were 8 or 9 vasa. And he was left in charge. He's acting abbot, left in charge. Ajahn Pasano, Ompor Pasano, and Ajahn Amaro, Ajahn Santo, all the other senior monks were gone. And it was similar to the amount of rain we've been experiencing, but I think it was even more. It was just this torrential period of rain. I think there was one moment I actually was walking down the road and I had to crouch down with the umbrella over me because there was just so much water coming down that if I didn't crouch down, it was just going to be completely soaked. And I was surprised that the umbrella didn't collapse. But one night through this rain, I was just pelting the roof, and I think it was a night similar to this. I can't remember, but I thought we had some sort of late night talk, and it was like the truck was heading up, and we found out that the road had collapsed. There was a landslide, and that had come onto the road. And I just remember being in the back of the truck, and it was raining so hard, I had to keep the hood that I had on, like, looking down, just there was so much rain. And we were going up to this, we were driving up and we came to this landslide, and one of the monks looked to Ajahn Cunda and, well, what are we going to do? And Ajahn Cunda he kind of made an expression of not being sure. He said, well, let's just get these laymen here to just dig it out. It was a massive landslide. It was almost midnight. And my sense of generosity was not very present in that moment. So there was much more, I was poised to just be really upset. So I was waiting for Ajahn Cunda's words. So there was just this huge, it was going to probably take hours, I think, to dig it up. And I think we still could pass with the truck. And sort of waiting. I think others were kind of looking down, really not wanting to do what was being proposed. And Ajahn Cunda just said, I'm not going to ask people to do that. We can figure it out tomorrow. And there was just so much relief in that moment. But I wasn't aware of what was happening in my mind. I wasn't, it was so hard to get a sense of, like, okay, just the amount of aversion that arose, the fear and aversion about what, having to dig something out at a very late time at night in the cold and, a lot of rain. And just not, the inability to use that for Dhamma at that point, to really kind of be aware, okay, there's what I don't want to have happen right now, and there's just the sort of letting go of all that tension and pain and aversion and anger. And so, these are these things that we detect about ourselves, and we want, we often want to let go of, but it's very difficult in these moments. It becomes very hard. And in fact, I remember just, must have been about 2-3 weeks ago, I was talking to a senior monk where I can't remember whether I think I was speaking, and this monk had told me he was gonna he'd made a decision about something, or he was gonna go do something that I essentially kind of felt jealous of and didn't want him to do that thing. And it was just that recognition just in that moment to, oh yeah, right, this is just this is jealousy, and this is the desire to have something go differently. I don't want it to go this way. And before that moment arose, it was just clear in my mind that I was completely right, and what I was experiencing was this isn't correct, shouldn't be this way, and I was justified in my jealousy, fear, anger, whatever it was. It wasn't even a big deal what the other monk was talking. It was like nothing, but I was caught in that, and it was so helpful to have that insight, because it just immediately just allowed everything to drop, just completely drop away. Because I knew that was the voice of wisdom, that was understanding. That was a clear understanding of what the experience was. So often our desire for this kind of change in our life, it comes from a lot of projection of what we want to do. So we have a wholesome idea of what it is that would be better for us, but we're not often experiencing that in that moment, like what is my current moment experience now that will lead me to understand what it is that's best for me? Because the rest is it's an idea, it's a projection, it's a sense of what we think is right. And it's pointing in the right direction, but it's not until we gain insight into our current experience that we can actually see, right, this is what is helpful, this is what's beneficial for me, this is what will allow me to let go and realize peace. And so we're in a conundrum sometimes because we don't always have access towards that difficulty. We don't have access towards that in our experience sometimes. So we're often, coming up with what I could basically say are sankharas. They're compounded. They're bringing together of different experiences, and then kind of making that into something that we believe is solid. It is just our thoughts, our ways of thinking about things. So I think an example of this was like during one of the retreats I had, I was, as Ajahn Cunda had suggested, I was working with sleep. How much do we reduce our sleep? So the Buddha talks about a schedule that a monk would be on, and I think it's like from 8 to 12, you keep striving, you stay up. And then from 12 to 4, that's when you sleep, those 4 hours. And then from 4 to 8 is the third watch. So I might have gotten those off by 2 hours, but basically it's 4 hours of sleep. So we hear that and we think, oh yeah, okay. So this is what the Buddha recommends. This is the ideal. So someone might do that, and then they're really pushing themselves, pushing this 4 hours of sleep, trying to do exactly what the Buddha said, because he can't be wrong. He's got to be right. I remember trying to do that during a retreat, and I was engaging in a fair amount of sitting and walking, and I just got so tired throughout the day, just trying to maintain this. And I realized that it's just not, it's not, you have to start where you are. I could have really tried to continue that for a long time, and just probably been quite exhausted during the retreat. But that's not where I was at the time. It's not where my mind was. And so this sense of practicing with just 4 hours of sleep, it's a good idea, but we have to actually measure it against what our experience is. And so often we just come from this ideal of what it is that I'm supposed to be doing. Or we think that it's this sense of conceit that the Buddha talks about. I'm one who should be able to practice like this. I'm a good practitioner, or I know what I'm doing. But if we're continuing to fall asleep, all we get is just that same thing that the Buddha did. He was just striving without any wisdom. And before he became enlightened, he just was doing all of these ascetic practices Ajahn Cunda was talking about last night. And he did actually succeed in doing the practices, but he just ended up with a lot of conceit. I'm one who can do this. He said there's no one who could actually, although others could match his ascetic qualities, no one could actually go beyond them. He had gone so far. And so I think it's important that, when we're engaging with what it is we're interested in changing about our lives, what it is we're interested in bringing up, for example, during these 3 months of retreat, we're really try to be quite aware of our own personal experience without judging it, without kind of saying, well, I can sleep for just 4 hours. And more use that as an investigation, like what do I actually need? So what I think happened during that retreat when I was working on sleep is I started to say, like, okay, well, let's start at a higher number, like 6 hours, and then try to work down. And so that worked quite well. But I think I got down to about 4.5 hours on that retreat, and that was it. That was the limit for me. And even that was just the bare limit. It wasn't going to go any further. And at times, some days, it was just I was still tired from that. And in fact, I had to adjust my schedule. Do an hour or two of walking meditation in the morning. So this was more of really trying to get a sense of like what's possible. And for me, there was a measure of that. It's like, well, am I falling asleep throughout the day? And I could see that if I started with more sleep at first and then tried to come down, then I could really measure that quality. And it was very much determined by how much sleep I was getting. And so I just saw, well, I don't need to push myself more than that. And that was enough. But then when the rest of the year was going on, that didn't work. I went back to being tired again. So there's just a sense of like what's appropriate, what's appropriate for each one of us, and for others, maybe 7 hours of sleep is appropriate. Maybe that's what people need. Or maybe it's 6, maybe it's 5, whatever it is. It's something that we work with, rather than coming from an ideal around what we need. And I know from like those who are working out in the world, then actually there might need to be an opposite determination. I'm going to get 8 hours of sleep because I'm not functioning. I'm bitter and angry and upset and sleepy and groggy, and so again we just have to figure out where we personally are, and that's only through our own reflection around our present moment experience, what we keep seeing day by day, not from an ideal. most of you know this sutta that I think Ajahn Cunda talked about last night. It's the, or he at least mentioned the ideas around it, where the Venerable Sona and when he was a young child, as a monk in the Buddha's time, his name was Sona, and so when he was a young child, he grew up, with not many problems in terms of his upbringing. His family was quite wealthy, and he had these special feet. He had this little kind of very fine, like, hair on his feet, like almost more like a fuzz or kind of something, like it was very soft felt or something on the bottom of his feet. So it was sort of a strange condition, and I think when he was very young, King Bimbisara had heard about this and asked his family, "Oh, I want to see this young kid. I want to see this child." And so he did, and that was that. But he grew up, Sona grew up, and he eventually decided he wanted to become a monk. And so he did that. He asked for the going forth, and he went forth. And interestingly enough, one might expect, well, having such a lavish lifestyle, basically being able to not have any problems in one's life, just being brought up in a very wealthy household, one might not have that impetus to strive, but he was actually known for his incredible energy towards striving. So much so that the monks found that there was blood on his walking path. He was walking so much and striving so hard that the bottom of his feet bled. And this is not just because he had soft feet. He was actually really putting in a lot of striving. And through that amount of striving, he looked around and he saw his other monk friends, and he thought, wow, they're doing so much better than I am. They're so much more accomplished than me. And he thought he should just give up the practice and go back to his lay life and enjoy his wealth, but also use that wealth to do meritorious deeds. And the Buddha was able to kind of tune in to what Sona was thinking, and so he appeared to him, and he started to talk to Sona about this, because Sona was, he was quite distraught about what was going on with him, and the Buddhist, as many of you know, asked him about playing of a lute, and Sona was very skilled at playing the lute when he was before he became a monk, and so this became the simile of the lute. And the lute is it's similar to sort of like a cross between a violin and a guitar, medium-sized instrument with strings on it. So the Buddha said, when you used to string your lute, were there times when you had strung it too tightly? And so and he said, yeah. And he said, well, how did that sound? He said, it didn't sound very good. It was too high strung. And what about when it was too loose? He said, yeah, it wouldn't sound very good. I couldn't play it like that. And he said, so you found a way that you could tune it, that it was just right? And he said, yeah. I could when I tuned it, and then I could hear that the lute was playing well, then I knew it was tuned quite well. And so the Buddha used the simile to suggest in his practice it's just the same as that. If you strive too hard, you put too much energy into your practice, then you're just going to end up with this sort of restless feeling, this anxiety and restlessness. And if it's too loose, then you're going to, if you're too loose in your practice, just like the lute, it's going to lead you towards slackness, towards laziness, wanting to give up. It's not until you've got your energy kind of right in the middle of that, you've tuned it in quite well, that you can really benefit from that way of practice. Again, this was that middle way. And so he encouraged Sona in that, to practice like that, just being aware of whether he was striving too hard or he was becoming too lax. And I think in the end of that pursuance, I think it was said that he did realize arahantship. So each of us has to know ourselves. We have to know our conditions, know what's coming up for us. And during this winter retreat, we have a great opportunity to experiment with that in a way that we can really kind of examine our own minds, our own propensities, and try to be careful not to compare ourselves to others. Because you might think you know what others are going through, but you don't have their experience within you. You can even hear them talking about their own troubles or triumphs, but it doesn't matter, you still don't know it within. So even people's words can't really represent to you exactly what they're going through. So you can really only know yourself, so there's no point in trying to really look at others and compare yourself to them. And the Buddha really talked about this, whether you think you're better or worse, or you're the same. He called it all conceit, just the same, because it comes from a sense of I am. And so we have to be careful about when we, in this comparison, or we're looking at our own behavior and thinking, I'm just pathetic, I'm terrible at this, I can't get anything out of this. Just like Sona, we have to look at that and say, like, well, this is again back into this sense of I am. I'm terrible, I'm not right, I'm a failure. And then, of course, if we're not allowing that, the question is, well, what's the problem? Why is there a problem with being a failure? Why is there a problem with not getting it right? And we forget that we've created that within ourselves. We've created that problem where my meditation is supposed to be a particular way. My experience of the Buddha's teachings is supposed to be working out the way I had planned it. And we don't see that, right, this is just part of the whole experience, that we keep learning. When things feel terrible and we're in a lot of pain and we want to just give up, this is just another opportunity for learning. It's not that anything's wrong, it's actually right. It's right because it's what you're experiencing. And in the other direction, we have to be very careful as well. That sense of thinking sometimes we're superior to others. This was Epictetus who said, what is the first business of one who pursues philosophy? It is to part with self-conceit. For it is impossible for anyone to begin to learn what he thinks he already knows. And so we look at our own examination of what we think, and this is where the Buddha really warns us about our views and opinions. Another thing Ajahn Cunda had mentioned last night, why did the Buddha really keep talking about wrong view? That's something that one can ask oneself over and over again. What is this right view? What's this right view he's talking about? And, with the Four Noble Truths, the Buddha is really, essentially, when he talks about right view, is he says you see through the lens of these Four Noble Truths, and that is where your understanding comes from. So he's continually reminding us, you have to straighten out that view. You have to get that view right. And there's all these other views that human beings have, that they come up with. And so we have to be very careful with this, because we often can have a view, especially around the view that I'm correct, or my view is correct, or the way I think about this is correct. And it can cause a lot of pain and difficulty for our practice. It undermines our ability to understand the Dhamma. So as we're entering this retreat time, I had given a reflection a few days ago saying that, well, it's possible to think of things as just, this retreat time isn't really different. And from an ideal perspective, we can say, well, we're just changing postures, doing a little more sitting and walking. But at the same time, things are changing. We're entering into a sacred ground, a sacred space. We're restringing our lute. We're figuring out how much we need to tighten it or loosen it. How tight or loose do we need to adjust our practice? So, just like Epictetus was pointing out, I think it's important to come to this time each year. I think that's a helpful reminder. Each winter retreat, just really remind us, okay, how can I part with all the things that I think I know, and use some of the wisdom that I've gained over my time with the Buddha's teachings, but not really convince myself that I really know exactly what I'm doing. This is called beginner's mind. And interestingly enough, if we open ourselves up to that, the beginner's mind is one that's interested, available, eager to learn. A beginner knows that they're a beginner. They don't have any doubt about that. It's new for them. And that's quite a helpful state, because then it opens us up to seeing our blind spots where we assume, no, I know what I'm doing. I don't need any help. I can't possibly learn from this. So we're inviting that quality in, that quality of beginning again. And in that same beginning, then we learn that we don't need to take such gargantuan steps. When you're a true beginner, you don't think about becoming an expert in 3 days. It takes time. And I think one of the things that pursuing this path as a monastic has taught me is just it does require so much patience. It really does require a lot of willingness to continue to be with a lot of unpleasant experiences, habits that we wish we didn't have, things we wish we hadn't have said. But to continue to remind ourselves, well, it's all okay. It's all part of the process of learning. I don't have to be an expert in a certain amount of time. There was a monk who stayed here, a Thai monk, and he had a poem, and the first line, I can't remember exactly, but it was something around billowy clouds traveling through a pale blue sky. And every day I am a friend to myself. Sometimes we need that reminder. We need that reminder of friendliness and kindness, because we are sometimes used to not showing that to ourselves. We say something that we regret and, oh, I'm such an idiot. But that's not friendly. So we think, I should be more friendly, I'm such a jerk. And we have to just be really careful of our habits, our tendencies, how we treat ourselves, how it is that we focus on our practice, or we see something as a failure or something as a triumph. Or we get ahead of ourselves and we have this amazing meditation we want to tell everyone about. And then months of misery. That's all part of the practice. So while we're doing this, while we're engaging with these teachings, we want to pace ourselves and have an awareness of the expectations we're going to have. And there will be expectations. This is what the Buddha talked about as being dukkha. It should be some other way than the way I think it is, or the way it is. I wish it was some other way. I wish it wasn't like this. Me somewhere else happy. And so that's this dukkha that the Buddha wants us to continue to reflect on. This sense that we create. Sense that it's not right, something's not right. And it should be better, it should be different. I don't like the way it is. It's very simple, but it's so hard to get our minds around, because we believe that is the correct way that we should see things. There's something wrong here and I need to correct it, I need to make it better. And so as much as we can have an awareness of that within our practice, then we can really understand our minds, and we can begin to make advances. Just like I was referring to that just that basic insight. Oh, like I just want it to be other than what it is, and when I let go of that desire, then I see that's the end of dukkha. It's not the permanent end, but it's a beginning. And as we're working with our own minds in the monastery, or on retreat, then we might all of a sudden snap to it and realize that there are other people here. And oftentimes our work, when we're working with the mind, we think that it's these other people that are the obstructions to us. If it was just someone else, I'd be happier. If this person to the right or left of me wasn't on the planet, then the whole world would be happier. So we do the same thing with people, and we get into these ruts and strange positionings and create enemies in our own minds out of just the things that don't even really make sense when we get down to it. So relationally, as we work with our practice, it's something also to focus on. How do we relate to others when we're silent, when we're not speaking? Someone might ask us for a moment, I just wanted to say something to you for a second. Can we step outside? Because there are others around, and you might feel, I don't want to talk to this person. And right there, we know this is this perfect point of learning, of understanding our own minds. Or we hear something that is just so innocuous, and we make some huge problem out of it. Because of this sankhara, we've compounded something, we've created what we think has occurred. And so, I think one of the most important things that we can do with trying to change our habits is trying to understand how we relate to others. And there's no better time to do that than a silent retreat. Human beings are often interpreting so much from the body language of others, so you get to see that. But when the speech is gone, you do lose out on a factor of I'm not sure what's going on here. And so then the question is well, how can you be okay with that then? Isn't it all right to not know what's going on? And if we put forth that just well-wishing quality towards another person, then it doesn't really matter. If when we're relating to others in silence, we have a sense of doing so with kindness, then they will feel that. And if we do the opposite, it's a sense of aversion, or hatred, anger, then others will feel that too. And again, it's a very helpful exploration. Sitting down for meditation, I can't believe he's going to do that. I couldn't believe it. Again, he's going to talk to me. And I just wanted to pass the sponge. It was not that big of a deal. And you see just how that comes up in your meditation. That aversion or misunderstanding, misconceiving. So there's all kinds of ways that we can relate to our sense of how we want to change, how we want to begin anew. And in many ways we want to part with our own beliefs or understandings about how we should do this. But we also want to acknowledge that we do have some understanding. There is some wisdom there to even want to aim in that wholesome direction. But the best we can do is try to examine this in our own minds, rather than come up with a list of all the things I'm going to do, all of the new practices I'm going to strive for to become the perfect meditator and realize enlightenment at the end of these 3 months. Maybe you will, but maybe you won't. So these are just some words of advice and encouragement for our oncoming retreat. Those of us who are doing this after many times. Others, this might be the first time. And I just want to wish everyone best with this coming new year. And if there's an interest in change, then to do that with as much wisdom and understanding as you can bring forth in your practice. Anyone? So for our New Year's Eve, we'll strive a bit and meditate till midnight. So people are welcome to do sitting or walking meditation until 11:30. If everyone who's still around can come into the hall, then we'll sit for a short while, and then we'll do some Paritta chanting to bring in the new year. And I'll just ring the bell at some point between 11:30 and 12, and we can do that. Otherwise, have a good night.